I hear that we have started the recording. Is that an indication, Shannon, that we have everyone to get started?
I believe that's the indication that we are ready to start, that it's 1:30 in the afternoon now, Mountain Time, and we should be set to get started. It looks like a number of other people are joining us as we speak, so we'll hold off for another minute just to hopefully get everyone on board who's going to be coming in the next minute or so, and then we'll go.
Okay, great.
All right, Amber, if you want to get us started.
I sure will. Great, thanks everyone. Appreciate you setting this up, Dr. Bayless. Montana, it's wonderful to be talking with our district leaders there today, this afternoon. We appreciate your time and joining us to learn more about this pilot study that's being conducted this school year. We at Metametrics are happy to spend time with you today to answer any questions and hear your concerns if you have enrolled already, or if you are still thinking about enrolling, that we can help address those topics as well towards the end of the webinar. Our agenda for today will be for you to hear a little bit from OPI on the vision for their assessment program, to learn more about Metametrics, and then talk some through the overview of the study. We'll talk about the purpose, the sample that we're using in this design. We'll go through some of the logistics that we'll need to partner with, and then the timelines that are associated with the activities. We'll wrap up with a little bit of information on some professional learning opportunities to help your districts learn more about the Lexile and Quantile measures and how they can be used with your educators and parents. So now I'll turn it over to Dr. Bayless to hear a little bit of from OPI.
Thank you. So I'm Dr. Bayless. I believe all of you have received at least one email from me. And I'm going over the structure of the Metametrics program and sort of the OPI side of what's going on. And the goal right now is, this is a novel assessment method that we're trying to pilot in the state of Montana, with the ultimate goal of easing the assessment burden on local districts and schools. Next slide. So the pilot study is specifically to cover a wide variety of Montana districts so that they can get an accurate sample. And the purpose of the pilot study is, like I said, to minimize overall burdens on local states and districts. And I just wanted to take a moment. I wanted to thank all of the districts that have agreed to participate in the study. It's absolutely critical that we get a minimum number of people involved in the study, and the hope is to be able to substantially increase the quality of life for the administrators and for the teachers in the state of Montana by improving the state assessment system. Next slide. All right, so ultimately what we're looking at is we're looking to reduce the burden of state mandated testing by allowing individual districts and schools to select their preferred test assessment mechanism from their preferred vendor. Right now, we're using a number of different vendors, and we're trying to assess the results of the statistical studies that Metametrics can do and compare that to the mandated testing results that we will get at the end of the year. So the ultimate goal of the pilot program then is federal defensibility. We're trying to develop a system that we can then defend to legislators, and we can defend to the federal government in order to establish a new testing mechanism that allows schools and districts to select their preferred method of performing assessment tests. The partnership with Metametrics is conducted under the ESSER 1 funding, and it's for the purpose of reducing lost learning time, increasing the efficiency of data collection. There's a number of specific state funding mechanisms that have gone into this, in order to allow this study to take place. No one else in the United States is doing something quite like this. So it's really some sort of an opportunity for a state like Montana, especially a relatively low population state where implementing something like this is possible, to shine in the development of new technologies. And I wanted to thank Metametrics also for their partnership in this program. Metametrics performs the statistical wizardry that makes it possible in order to compare different test vendors so that the state can provide good data to the federal government, and we can get good data from local districts, even as local districts may have a preference for one type of testing over another. There's the SBAC, of course, which I had to deal with when I went to high school. And then there's other testing systems, NWEA, testing systems provided by Renaissance. There's STAR, I believe that's what Renaissance does, STAR. And each of these has its own benefits and drawbacks. And so the goal is to allow districts to have greater freedom in selecting which testing mechanisms they want, and to expand the testing window so that you don't have a hard mandated, very strict testing window, and instead expand it so that teachers and administrators can work around more variable testing windows that'll better support whatever their specific curriculum works out to be. All right, back to you, Amber.
It's a very innovative vision, and so we're going to go stepwise. I'm going to turn now to Lucy Willits, who works with our state partners, and she's going to share a little bit about who we are and how we have come into this work.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you so much for this opportunity. A couple of things to note. So Metametrics is a research company. We created Lextiles and Quantiles, and it began with a grant many years ago. This particular study is to achieve the goals that Montana has outlined. And one of the reasons that we think we can do this study is because we do have a scale in which you can put different assessments on a scale through Lextiles and Quantile measures. And then those measures then, or that score then gives you the opportunity to have resources that can help improve student achievement. So we've been in this for a long time. This study is new because typically what we do when we do these scales, we do them individually. We don't put them on a common scale, but we're excited to work with Montana and see what's possible and to help the superintendent achieve her vision. Back to you, Amber.
I was going to say, so to help us think through a little bit more of the details of the study is our is Sue Steinkirk, who heads our R&D program at Metametrics. So Sue.
Great, thanks, Amber. Hi, everyone. So as Dr. Bayless said, OPI is interested in investigating whether interim assessments that are given to students throughout the school year by districts can be used for federal accountability. So one commonality across a number of interim assessments is that they report Lexile and Quantile measures. So while the interpretation of Lexile and Quantile measures is the same across the various assessments, the actual reported score can vary because of inherent differences within the assessments. So the first step towards reaching OPI's goal is to look at how well or how close the performance of students on the interims reported in terms of Lexile and Quantile lines up with the performance of the students on the state exam. So next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about what we're looking for in terms of a sample for the study. So OPI is recruiting, what we want is a representative sample, and we want a student sample that's representative of the student population within Montana. And that is so we can, as to much as we can, generalize the results from the study across the state. And what we mean by representative is we want to have a representative number of, students by gender, by race, ethnicity. We're looking within each grade level for this representation. We want to look at things like, larger districts, smaller districts, urban, rural, look at kids who, what percentage get free and reduced lunch, all of these demographic characteristics that describe the student population within Montana. So in order to have enough data to make decisions about next steps, we want approximately 1,500 students per interim exam within a content area, and by that we mean math or reading, at each grade level. So if we look at grade levels, we're restricting to grades 3 through 8. And then because we need, pretty substantial sample of students by grade level for each interim and content area, OPI has identified the interim assessments that are most likely have the large enough volume to produce or to support the sample. And those are listed on your screen. So these are really the interims that we are targeting. The other factor is that, as we referred to earlier, they have the interim exams have to be linked to the Lexile and quantile scales. So that's another requirement. So next slide. So just to give you an idea of the work that's gone on so far and what lies ahead, the next couple slides provide a high-level overview of the pilot study timeline. So back this summer, we were working closely with OPI and helping, advise on things like what are the administration protocol, looking at what the sample requirements were. Based on all that, OPI did identify the interim assessments, and they are now actively recruiting districts to participate in the study. The other critical piece to this study is that the content alignment for the interims, there has to be evidence or verification that the interim assessments align to the Montana state content standards. And so OPI is in the process of working with the vendors, the interim vendors, to obtain that information as well. So once we have districts signed up, we'll be working with you and collecting data over the course of the school year. And we're looking at 3 testing windows: fall, winter, and spring. At the end of the school year, we will work with OPI to gather all of the state summative assessment data. And what we do is we match that up with the interim data, and then really our heavy duty analysis begins next summer, in which we'll crunch all the data and look at trends, look at how things relate, work together, and then create a report and report that back to OPI, so then we can get together and determine next steps. So assuming that everything turns out as we hope with phase 1, we will be looking for this as Dr. Bayless said, this is a multi-stage, multi-year project. Step 1 is to look at how well the interims align with the summative. Assuming we get the data we need and that everything works out as planned, then we will be looking at different models so we can be tracking growth using the interims as well. So that's kind of the total sum of the pilot design, and I will turn it back over to Amber.
Thank you. For those of you who have received some information from about enrollment, my name is Amber Aguirre, and I have been sharing these key documents as new districts are coming into the study. So let's talk about these documents just to help those who are still getting ready to enroll, or to make sure that we address them, so that if you have any questions on what's been shared, we can use the opportunity here. The first is a memorandum of agreement that outlines the expectations that we have of the district for this study and the expectations of Metametrics for the duration of this study. We also are providing a PDF of the interim assessment administration protocols. So this document contains some information related to some instructions unique to this school year for the purposes of conducting the pilot study. We know that the fall administration window is starting to close for many districts across Montana. And so we just ask that if there's any inconsistency in the protocols from your fall administration, that you would just disclose this to Metametrics so that we would be able to consider this information as we're looking at the data. But we would be looking for the districts to be implementing these for a winter and a spring administration. 2 other documents include a template for what we're asking of the district in relation to student IDs. And this template would just contain 3 columns that would have a student's grade, their ID that is used for the interim assessment, whichever that might be at your district, and then the student's ID that is used for the end of year state summative assessment. This will help us match data sets when we are working next summer. We've also provided a template of the data that we will be approaching your vendors for, with your permission, of course. So we will be, you can see exactly what we are asking of the vendors to disclose to Metametrics. So there's nothing that you need to do with that template. It's just disclosing what we're sending to vendors and requesting of them. If you have not already done so, we've asked that you complete the pilot study enrollment form. This is just a Google form that helps us collect important information about what assessment you used in math and ELA and at which grades. We've noticed that some districts are using the assessments at grades 3 through 8, and some might be using them at just 3 through 5. So this is important information for us to collect as we're monitoring that sample size and our end counts. We're also collecting some information on your anticipated testing windows for winter and spring. We will be working with OPI to designate specific winter and spring administration windows. And so the extent that we can collect all of the district information to make that window fit with what your plans are to the extent possible is our goal there. So we appreciate you using this form to share some of this information with Metametrics. Also, if you have not already, we ask that you sign the memorandum of agreement and get that returned to Metametrics so that we have that all documented. Of course, if you have questions on that memorandum, or if you'd like to consult further on that document, we are happy to talk more with you about it or hear your concerns. But that's just a simple agreement that just outlines our expectations of you districts and your expectations of us, Metametrics. Oops. We know that the conditions under which assessments are administered has an impact on scores and score fluctuations. Some of those factors are, when a test is given, the testing environment, testing time and perceived consequences of scores and student motivation. And so to really do our best to minimize some of the score fluctuations in this pilot study, we've worked with OPI to implement 2 practices. And the first of which is designating those test administration windows so that the scores are really being represented within a certain period of time for all districts in this study. As I just mentioned, we will be collecting your anticipated test administration windows through that enrollment form. And once we have completed the enrollment process with all districts, we'll be working with OPI to designate the best window for that winter and spring administration. Another practice that we're implementing for this study is utilizing some interim assessment administration protocols. And these protocols were designed to just put a little bit more structure to the administration of these interim assessments across all of the districts. So there's a little bit of similarity there across how the testing experience is for students across Montana who are using these assessments. So we're asking that test administrators ensure a secure testing environment during each administration, ensuring a standardized testing environment and conditions across each test administration window, making sure that there's adequate time scheduled for students to be able to complete the interim assessment during the course of a single school day for a single subject. So students taking an ELA or reading component would complete that in a day. Pausing is allowed as long as the student would complete the assessment on the day that they start the test, and that these interims be administered in person. There's a few more detailed instructions for test administrators that relate to before testing and during the test administration that are contained in the PDF. So I haven't gone into those here, but of course, if you have a copy of that and have some questions, we're certainly happy to address those if you have them. As mentioned earlier, if you do have any inconsistency in the protocols and how your district administration went this year due to the pandemic or when your district enrolled in the study, we just ask that these be disclosed to Metametrics so that we can consider those factors as we're looking at the data this summer. So speaking of data, let's go ahead and talk about the data collection that we're looking at here. Districts, the expectations of you is that you'll be providing Metametrics with an Excel file of student IDs that will contain their grade, the interim test ID, and the state test ID for all students participating in the pilot study. This, was mapped out in that Excel template that was provided during the enrollment process. So that is the expectation of you, is that you will provide that mapping of a student's ID from their interim assessment to the summative and their grades, so that we at Metametrics can look at the data sets for each of those assessments and look at the scores. Metametrics will be using that ID file to approach your district's vendor for the students' math and reading scale scores for their Lexile reading and quantile measures, and then the test administration date from when those scores were captured. So that is the data that we're requesting of the vendors. And I just like to draw attention to the fact that we are not collecting student name, date of birth, gender, or other personal identifying information. So really what we're looking at here is the district to provide the student ID file, and Metametrics will be going to the vendors to ask for the interim assessment scores and administration dates. And then Metametrics will also be working with OPI to get the state summative data. As far as timeline goes, now that the fall administration for many of the districts here has closed, we ask that you start to think about preparing that student ID file and getting that ready for Metametrics, so that we can have all of those in-house by the end of this month and begin to approach the vendors for the fall data. And then there will be the winter collection date no later than February 25th, and then another spring request that the student ID file be prepared and provided to Metametrics at the end of May. So a few study reminders as far as what's coming next for districts and for Metametrics. For the districts, we just again ask that if you have not enrolled already, that you complete that enrollment form, that you review and return the MOA, and that you begin to prepare and return that district student ID file with grade, interim test ID, and the summative test ID by the end of October. All of this information, or if you have questions about this information, can be directed to me at pilotstudy@lexile.com. I check that email account regularly, every day, periodically throughout the day. So we try to get a response to you as soon as they're coming in, so that you're aware of what's happening. On the Metametrics side, we'll be returning the memorandum of agreements to the districts for your records. We will begin to look at those test administration windows for winter and spring and work with OPI to establish those windows and then communicate them to our district partners. And then we will also be working with the vendors next to collect the data from this fall. And now I'm going to share a little bit of information. Well, I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Lucy Willits, to share some information on professional learning opportunities, so that you learn more about some opportunities for you outside of the logistics of this study.
Thanks, Amber. I am doing this on behalf of Matt, who's actually doing some professional learning for some other states right now. A couple of things that I think are worth noting. So Amber's done a nice job of going through the study, what we need, but I think the key is what is a Lexile and quantile, and what do your educators need to know about Lexiles and quantiles, and how can it affect them with their work with students? So that's where we come in and do professional learning. It's all part of the contract that we have with Montana. We'll go through what the framework is, how it can be used, all the tools that are available, and it's super easy. All you need to do is email Matt and we'll get something set up over Zoom. Amber, can you go to the next slide? So this is a selection of some of the things that are on the hub, which you'll have access to. All Montana educators will have access to the hub. All they have to do is go in and register with their school ID or their school email address. And excuse me, I want to clarify the school email address, not ID. And you get it all right away. So these are some of the things that are available. When Matt does and his team goes through the professional learning, they walk through what these tools are, what they can be used for. And his team are entirely made of educators, so they really are clued in to what teachers need and want. And I think,
Yep, and if I just go to the next slide, you'll go ahead and see the hub tools for the quantile framework.
yep, so there's some examples there. And I think we had one more slide, didn't we, Amber?
Just for questions and answers. So
Okay.
I think, yep,
There we go.
yep. So we'll just go ahead and share these tools. These are great tools for our educators. And again, you know, the neat thing about Lexile and quantile measures is that we can look at the data and the schools and help the state understand that data at the local level. But it also is a real nice connection to our schools directly, and the parents who are working with their teachers and their students to help them on their way through their education and on to college and career readiness. So it's a really neat opportunity to connect with Matt Copeland. I'll go ahead and go back up to his email address there, where districts can really connect with him directly on this opportunity. So I'll just highlight that please be in touch with Matt, who unfortunately couldn't be on this afternoon session, but we'll be happy to work with you to get these scheduled on these opportunities. If you have questions related to the linking study, or I'm sorry, not linking study, pilot study itself, I will be your contact, and I'll go ahead and flip back to that slide. Amber Aguirre at pilot study or pilotstudy@lexile.com. So at this time, Trennan or Dr. Bayless, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you to help monitor the chat room and see if there are some questions for Metametrics. We're happy to address those now.
Absolutely. So there's a Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. If you have any questions, you can type them into the chat, you can raise your hand, or you can drop them specifically in the Q&A. So we're happy to answer any questions. There are email address. There's my email address, of course, and then there's there's the email addresses for Metametrics. Lori Barron, you appear to have a question.
Thank you. If you do not reach the minimum number of 1,500 per grade level per subject, what is the plan? And if you plan to move forward anyway, how will that impact the integrity of the data?
So we are very close to the 1,500 per grade level per subject. And I believe that the plan is to pull the best quality data we can out of the numbers that are available. Amber, you can comment more accurately on the effects of how your statistical systems are set up and how those minimal numbers affect the models that you use.
Great. Well, I appreciate you passing it to me, but I'm also going to rely on Sue here to help set the parameters for what our expectations are.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Amber. So we really are, the target's 1,500 per grade, per exam, per content area. I probably didn't say that. It's per interim assessment for a grade and a content area. If we don't receive, we do have some flux there. We don't, if we get close to 1,500, we're still going to include those interim exams for that subject and grade in the study. If we get substantially less data, then we, may look at the data, but it won't be included in the complete study.
All right, thank you. Let's see, do we have other questions? Lori Barron again.
So my colleagues are on here with me, probably think you should just leave me unmuted and ready because I have a
Okay.
So are there other states that are doing the same thing, or will this be Montana only?
As far as we know for the time being, there's a number of other states that are proposing more novel assessment methods, but Montana is the only one that is working with this specific implementation of this specific innovative development. So this is solely a Montana project right now, and we are going to be trying to provide defensibility for the federal government to make it reasonable to implement across the state, and other states may wish to use our model in the future, but right now it's just us.
And if it is if it works out and it's approved, will this be required for all districts in Montana to move to this, or would districts still have the choice of the traditional standardized option?
So at this time, that would require legislative action to know for sure. At this time, however, the thought process is that we can apply assessments. Different schools, different districts would be able to use different assessment types that they have a preference for. So the ultimate position would be that districts would be able to use their current assessment. They would be able to adjust to an adjacent assessment, or they could use the SBAC for their primary assessment. So if we did move to this, it would depend specifically on how the legislation went through, and whether or not the legislators wanted to include a original state mandated testing system, a state mandated system as an alternative, or if the legislators wanted to permit local districts to instead be able to select the SBAC as one of the acceptable assessments and just use this assessment system where the school uses a more traditional SBAC test.
So currently districts pay for all of the things that you've mentioned, not the interim, right? But STAR, MAP, Ames Web Plus, all of those types of things are district expenditures. Smarter Balance and its interims are state expenditures. Whichever method that the district chooses, will the state pay for it?
I believe that the way we're currently looking at it, again, this has to do with legislation, and this has to do with the results. The results of the pilot study have to be reasonable before we can consider these as implementations. However, at this time, I would say that based on my knowledge, there's been some debate as to whether the state would be expected to pay for it or the districts would be expected to maintain their current model. The ultimate goal is to reduce the overall expenditure, and there have been discussions about using the backing of the state essentially in order to contract with these different assessment providers. So we might be able to do better if the state ends up purchasing the assessments, but this really depends on legislation, the results of the pilot study, and what it looks like going forward. These are very good questions, but we won't have good answers for them at the state level until we get some results from the pilot study and until we can talk to legislators about the possibility of different methods of implementation.
Right, yeah, all that makes sense. I just, you mentioned that reducing expenditures is a goal. Obviously, that's a goal for us at the district level as well. And so a big concern of mine would be if we move to these, is the financial burden going to be removed from the district? And if we don't move from these, are we going to have to pick up the financial burden of Smarter Balance, or will the state keep that financial commitment to our districts?
That's something I personally do not have an excellent answer for, but I would love to discuss this. This is something that we would need to talk to the superintendent about directly, and the deputy superintendent and a number of our legislators in order to know for sure. The state trustees and educational advocates are definitely the people that we would be talking to in order to determine which way we can go with funding. But you're absolutely right. The overall objective is to reduce the necessary expenditures. And one of the methods that we have discussed being able to do this is if the state can contract with, say, 3 or 4 or 5 specific assessments, and only those 3 or 4 or 5 specific assessments, then what the state can do is it can provide more options to the individual districts, though, again, it depends on legislation.
Right, no, understood. I just, the primary goal for us anyway is not to reduce expenditures. It would be a byproduct goal, but the primary goal for us is to get better data we can use to improve outcomes. And so I hope that OPI isn't going to make a decision just based on expenditures.
Well, the primary goal for OPI in this situation has always been reduction of the burden of mandated testing on local districts and schools. We really ultimately want to provide local districts with more flexibility as to how they implement testing, when they implement testing, and what assessments they have a preference for. So the goal is to get better data with more flexibility for the local districts. However, ultimately, someone does, of course, have to front the money for it. And how that works out in the legislative process is something that we're going to have to see when it comes to the educational advocates and stakeholders and the state legislators. But that's definitely something that we're paying attention to.
Thank you.
Let's see, we have another question in the chat from Allison Neese. And it says, can you drop the link to the enrollment from here in the chat so we can access it easily and the MOA? You should have that in your email. Amber, do you think you could drop the link into the chat directly? Would that be something that you could do?
Let's see, I'll go ahead and stop share for a minute while I go ahead and find it. Thank you.
All right. And then another question from Amy Piazzolla is, what is the estimated savings if the pilot is successful and approved by legislators? That depends on contract negotiation. That's something that will definitely take time. With a larger body like the entire state operating in terms of a contract negotiation, we can generally get better rates than smaller districts trying to negotiate specific contracts with companies. But that's really a question that will take quite some time to hash out, and we need to see the results of the pilot study, and we need to formalize federal defensibility before that really becomes significant. So I would love to be able to give you an exact number, but at this time, the pilot study isn't far enough along, and the legislative process hasn't even begun yet. And again, we need a defensibility peer review process before we can even send this up to the legislators and try to get action. So I can't make any informed statement in terms of the potential savings that could be had. And that will of course depend on the change in the educational system.
Sorry, I just see my hyperlink didn't go through, so I'm still looking for that link. Thank you.
Okay, that's what that was. Let's see, let me look for other questions. Q&A, there's nothing in the specific Q&A form still, and there's nothing in the chat still. So if anybody else has a question, feel free to let me know. There's the pilot study enrollment form. The link to it, forms.gle, has just been posted in the chat. If you think that you're lacking paperwork or think you don't have access to something, feel free to email me. You can find my email at the OPI website, Dr. Trina Bayless. I should be there under leadership staff. And you can also email Amber Aguirre, or you could email both of us or CC one of us on the email, and we'll be sure to get you whatever you don't have. So the goal is to make this as easy and painless for our districts and superintendents as possible, because we all know that you're quite busy and you have a lot on your plate as is, which again is why I'm so thankful that you all took the time to show up today and ask the questions. Let's see, I'll give everyone another couple of minutes in case anybody else thinks of a question. And if you think of something after the fact, feel free to email me or Amber, like I said earlier. Oh, and one thing that I recalled while sitting here, this is why I always give it a couple of extra minutes. These videos, this webinar is being recorded. It's going to be available on the OPI website if you want to go back over any of the material. The morning session will be recorded and also posted on the website, so you'll be able to see both. You will be able to see answers to questions that were asked in the morning session, and people who were present for the morning session will be able to go over the afternoon session and see any answers to questions that were posted there.
For those of us at Metametrics, we just want to extend our thank you and appreciation for your time this afternoon. And again, if you have any questions, please email me, Amber Aguirre, I'll be responding through all study communications through pilotstudy@lexile.com. Matt Copeland will also be available to work with you on scheduling those professional learning opportunities. And of course, if you have any questions or concerns about the district expectations or the Metametrics expectations, please be in touch and we're happy to talk through those.
All right. Well, if nobody else has any questions, I think that we will call it a day. Thank you all very much for showing up. We really appreciate it. Again, I think that it's been extremely helpful.
It looks like there might be one more question.
I did see
there.
that. Just popped up.
Yep.
What are you doing to ensure that you will have enough student data to work with? Well, right now, we're just passing through the autumn testing section, as you saw in the phase 1 study in the schedule. And that provides us with a little bit more time to be ready for the winter testing. So we're going to be contacting a number of additional districts that either have not gotten back to us, that indicated initial interest, or districts that have provided a little information but haven't completed their paperwork. And then there's also a number, we can try and bring in a couple of new districts because we are extremely close to the 1,500 minimum right now. I think, actually I have it right here. I can give you exact numbers. Right now at this time, we are sitting at, I believe, between 1,100 and just over 1,500 for the primary tests that we're working on using right now, the primary assessments and vendors that we're working with right now. We have a minimum of, I think, 1,100 for the smallest number and a maximum of around 1,800 for the largest number. So we're really quite close in several of our assessments. So it would not take very much to push us over that edge. For 1,500 perfect data in everything, right now it's just in one of the 4 sort of assessments that we're really looking at. So right now, we're either going to be able to bring on a couple of more districts, or we're going to be able to get information back from a number of districts that earlier expressed interest and really haven't gotten back to us since then. So I do believe that we're going to be able to get over a critical minimum in order to perform these assessments accurately over time. However, it's going to be a little bit close in order to actually get there. It's going to take some work on our part here at the OPI, which we of course are happy to do. Thank you for the question, Amy Piazzolla. Let's see. I think that is it then. Let me check again to make sure that there's nothing I missed. I don't see anything else unless Lori, you have an additional question.
I'm good, but thank you.
All right, your hand was still up, so I figured I would ask to make sure.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
All right, so I think that will be it then for the afternoon session. Again, thank you all very much for coming. I have a great deal of respect for the amount of time that you took out of your day to come here and join the digital conference. I know that you're all quite busy, so thank you very much and have a great evening.